Reaching, discovering, always growing. This is the world of the child. In the warm circle of parental care, a child learns to trust and to love, the building blocks for a fulfilling adult life. Yet an epidemic number of our children endure those early years in confusion and shame, weighed down by secrets. These are the victims of incest and other sexual exploitation, children who must struggle to grow up. This film celebrates women and men everywhere who are moving courageously out of that childhood silence.
I was molested both by my older brother and by my father. Today I really want to talk about being molested by my father. I think that had the biggest impact on me. The earliest memory was age 1 year. It lasted until about age 11 or 12, at which point my father had a stroke and it stopped because of that. When I was younger, I can remember being slapped around the face a lot and hit with his hands, and then when I was older with a belt. And apparently that turned him on, and he would then start doing sexual things to me. And when I was really young, the memories I have are that he would use objects, that he would stick objects in my vagina. And later, by around age 9, it was actual intercourse. And during the time that he would be doing it, he would be telling me that I was bad and I was trash, like all women. And it was just terribly violent, very painful.
As survivors speak out, we discover how little we've known about the sexual abuse of children.
A lot of people think of it as intercourse, that it would have to involve intercourse. But when you're dealing with children, all kinds of sexual acts that are considered much less than intercourse have great meaning to the child.
Maybe the best way to understand this is to imagine ourselves as children again, to remember our lack of experience and knowledge and our small physical size. We're conditioned to respect and obey adults, and we're also totally dependent on them. No wonder we can be so easily manipulated by someone we love and trust.
I'm not sure when the sexual abuse began because I was so young. There's a very good chance that it could have started when I was as young as 1 or 2. I start remembering around 3 years old. The offender was the son of a woman who was very close friends with my mother. And she was like a second mother to me. And my offender was like a brother. He was 15, 16, 17 during the molesting. And I really did care for him a lot. He'd take me to the park and play with me. And I had a lot of trust, and it was very much like a big brother. It was very, very special to me.
When would he sexually abuse you, and what did he do?
That's the hardest for me to talk about. What I remember sleeping with him or having to sleep with him. I remember being molested on the couch. I used to sleep on the couch. I remember not being able to go out to play until he sexually abused me. I do remember him actually having intercourse with me, and I vaguely remember vaginal penetration, but I do distinctly remember him penetrating me anally.
Caught in a web of fear and silent pain, many children express these feelings in drawings and paintings. All of the children whose pictures we see here were being sexually abused. This little girl, who saw herself as a tiny trapped figure, was being molested by a 15-year-old boy. Another enclosure, this time a vaginal opening encircled by teeth, drawn by a 9-year-old boy who was being molested by his mother. Reported cases of sexual abuse by women are rare, but as with all such incidents, devastating to the child. At first, we see here a drawing of what appears to be an ordinary family. On closer inspection, we notice that none of the figures have mouths. This was a 5-year-old's way of showing that her family had warned her to say nothing to others about her sexual abuse. An adolescent victim of father-daughter incest interprets her mother as a distant figure whose back is turned. The girl's perception is that her mother is unable or unwilling to help her.
My husband molested 2 of my oldest daughters. The incest started when the oldest one was 5 and went on until she was 15. And with the other girl, it began probably around the same age for her, around 5 or 6, and ended at exactly the same time as the other one. And everything went on, from fondling, oral sex, to intercourse.
If you were sick, you went to school sick because you knew home wasn't safe. Where other people would play hooky in order to get out of school, and we didn't. We beg and steal just to go to school. The only safe times were, during our menstrual cycle. I think that's the only safe time that I can ever think of. And even then wasn't safe. And I think when have oral sex.
Trapped and powerless, sexually abused children often live in emotional isolation. Communication was always difficult for Laverne and her daughters. During this filming, a counselor helped the 4 women understand each other as they expressed their feelings of loss and betrayal. Laverne's husband, who was living in the home, did not participate.
I remember as a child, I remember being 7 or 8 years old in the bathroom, and you were in the living room, and Dad was in the bathroom using vibrators on us, and I thought, how come she can't hear? How come she can't hear this? And I just felt like a prisoner in my home. I just never felt home was a safe place to be. I always wanted to be away from there. My friendships were away from home. They weren't in our home. I just never felt comfortable there. Well, I can remember having appendicitis. My dad still wouldn't take no for an answer. Couldn't even walk. And he sexually abused me. I just never could understand why it happened to any of us. All I knew was that when it wasn't my turn, I just beat it out the door as fast as I could and tried not to think about what was happening in the home that I just left.
To the outside world, families in which incest is occurring look like any other family. Sexual abuse of children happens in all classes, all races, and all religions. In the past, most victims did not dare to reveal what was happening to them. But recently, more and more people have begun to speak out, and there is a phenomenal increase in reported cases each year. In Dr. Diana Russell's recent random survey of 930 women, more than 1 out of 3 women stated that they had been sexually molested before their 18th birthday. 1 out of 6 women identified themselves as victims of incest during childhood. According to Dr. Russell's survey, 96% of reported offenders are male.
When I look at the fact that there are so many male perpetrators, it makes me think that there must be something in the way men are raised that tends to encourage this behavior. In my own experience, I remember at 12 years old being encouraged by an older male relative to have sex before much later, the fear being otherwise I might not be manly enough. Now, there are certainly other messages boys get, and this is just one example. But I do feel that the roles men are raised to follow limit them in understanding their emotions.
If one were to take the roof off my house where I was growing up and look down into my family, it would seem my father was a very loud, controlling man. He controlled through his anger, intimidating everybody. He was very unpredictable. Whenever he was around, I was scared to death all the time. And so I was always trying to make everything okay so it wouldn't happen anymore. During family meals, we would all sit together as a family. That was real important to him, that we be a, quote, family. My father talked at us. I don't recall him ever asking how I was doing or what I was doing. He just had things to say, and he did all the talking. My mother was a very quiet person, accepting of the way things were, trying to please my father. I think that my mom really felt that it was her role to boost my father's ego and make him feel better and look better and so forth. I think it was the way she was raised.
I was 19 when I got married. I was 20 when the first child was born, 21 when the second was born, 23 when the third was born, and 24 when the last one was born. When I got married, I think I was still Cinderella looking for Prince Charming. Everything was going to be happy ever after, and there were just a lot of dreams and aspirations that I had that were so unrealistic. And yet they were probably the same as most of the other girls around me. After we got married, we stopped talking. When things didn't work out, it was blaming one another that it didn't work out. And with the house and 4 children, I just wanted to scream. Sometimes I would just lock myself in the bathroom for a few minutes to get my composure back. It was very hard for me to express myself, and I didn't talk about any problems with anybody, and my relationship with the kids was just almost non-existent.
It is in our childhood that we learn to be parents.
The things that I hated that my mom did to me, I turned around and did to my own children. My mother used to yell and scream, which I found myself doing with my children. I just literally hated myself at that point, but I didn't know how to handle the situation. That's not an excuse. That's just a way of looking back now and realizing that that's part of the things that get passed on from one generation to another.
When we are young, we accept what we learn from our parents without question.
My husband was a domineering person, and that's a family trait, I'm afraid, because his father was the same way. When he would come home from work, you could tell by the way he walked in the door which way the wind was blowing. We'd have to kind of walk around like we were walking on eggshells. It was like waiting for a time bomb to go off outside the home. It was just exactly the opposite. Very quiet, very withdrawn, had very few friends, still doesn't have very many friends.
The normal role for a man in this culture is to function at all costs, essentially. To function in the marketplace, to function on the battlefield, to function in an external sense. And soft emotions are viewed as things that get in the way. And many men can feel a kind of powerlessness in any situation where they may feel dependent, where they may feel sad, and they realize they're not free to express that. And that power is taken in ways that are approved for men, in symbolic ways. Men are allowed to be forceful, and men are allowed to be sexual, and men are allowed to be aggressive. And so men will take the power they don't have in ways that they're allowed to have, which is to be sexual with someone who is powerless.
When I chose to be in this film, I requested to be in the shadows to protect my daughter. She's only 11 years old, and I'm protecting myself too. I got custody of my daughter after her mother and I divorced, and after I remarried again, I started molesting. I started when she was 5 years old. I molested her in and out of relationships for a period of 3 years. I started by bathing her, and when I'd be drying her off, I'd fondle her a little bit. It escalated from there to oral copulation and sodomy. I never had intercourse with my daughter. I thought of it. She was too small. At the time that I was molesting my daughter, I didn't have much control of what happened in my life. I felt that I wasn't worth knowing. I tried not to look at my life, and I would get through the days that way. Molesting my daughter, I had control of her, where everything else was falling to pieces. I'd be molesting her, and I'd feel powerful. Afterwards, I would feel like an animal. I told my daughter if she ever told anybody that we'd be separated, she agreed that she wouldn't say anything about the molest because she didn't want to be separated. She was totally dependent upon me. I think my daughter had a real feeling of a Jekyll and Hyde in me, in that I was a very loving father most of the time, but occasionally I would come out and control her, manipulate her, abuse her.
The sexually abused child needs to trust, yet trust is no longer possible. And growing up becomes a struggle.
Because the whole job of young children is to learn to define themselves as individuals and to trust themselves, to get a sense of reality in the world. They have a very big job that requires a tremendous amount of energy. That energy is being diverted when they're being sexually or in other ways abused. That energy is being diverted into just surviving, into trying to sort out what is real, and also dealing with problems of self-hatred and guilt. I couldn't tell my parents. And I guess the reasons why I couldn't tell my parents, one, I was too young when it first started happening. I didn't even know if I had the verbal skills to be able to even tell them what was happening. And I'd been intimidated into being silent. I felt guilty. I felt ashamed of what was happening to me. I was afraid to tell my parents. Very afraid to tell my parents.
Well, it's always difficult to talk about experiences that involve being molested. I remember when I was 8 years old. I may have been 9. There were 2 separate occasions involving 2 different people. Both of them were older foster brothers of mine, and we would always wrestle. And each of these times, the wrestling became something more that I didn't understand at the time, where they would pin me down and perform anal intercourse on me, which I found certainly physically very painful, and that was the most clear memory that I have, even now. It was physically very painful. And I never talked about it until I was much older. Even now, it's difficult to talk about it. It never becomes easy. But it is something that it's important to share so that people know that these things do happen. And they happen to men and boys as well as to girls.
Okay. This is something that can happen to young people, and it's hard for most people to talk about.
In response to the enormous increase in reported cases of sexual abuse, prevention programs for schools are being developed throughout the country. These programs teach children assertiveness and help to prevent them from becoming victims.
This role play is when someone takes away your rights by touching you or kissing you in a way that you don't like. Okay? So listen very carefully to see what's going to happen when Vivian meets Uncle Harry this afternoon.
Hey, Vivian, how's my favorite niece today?
Okay.
Yeah, what you doing?
Watching TV.
Watching TV, huh? Cartoons again. Well, let's turn that off and have a little talk. You might sit a little closer to me so we can talk. That's better. You know what? I was in the store the other day, and I saw these T-shirts. They said Return of the Jedi on them. You know, I saw a red one. You would look so pretty in a red T-shirt. Well, I'm going to get it for you. Okay. And all you have to do is give me a nice kiss.
Go Harry, I
Come
don't
on.
wanna.
Vivian, I want you to kiss me. Come on.
I think I hear my Aunt Mary calling
Just
me.
a minute. Listen to me. This is our secret. You understand me? This is a secret between you and me. And you better not tell anybody, okay?
Now tell me something. How do you all think Vivian felt? Scared? Cheryl, how do you think she felt? Embarrassed. Okay. Fiona?
Hi.
Shy. Okay. Natasha? Sad. Felt bad. I'm sure she did.
The sexual abuse of children can and does occur at any time. Every child is vulnerable. I personally learned about incest and child sexual abuse at the age of 15 from firsthand experience. What happened is that I went to babysit for 4 small children, all under the age of 5. And during that evening, the man for whose children I was babysitting stayed with us and molested both me and his 4-year-old son in front of me. I later realized that one of the reasons that he chose to involve his son was because he thought this would create some sexual interest in me. I'm talking about this with a great deal of control at this point, but it has taken years for me to process the experience. It lasted 7 or 8 hours. And it's always tempting to say, well, how important could it be as compared with a girl who maybe has lived in a home for 5 or 6 years and undergoing incestuous abuse. As I look back, and I imagine that, of course, was the fate of the 4 small children in that family. And I suppose in a way I'm still trying to find a way to protect that 4-year-old that I could do nothing for at that time.
I can remember going to church camp, and I would go off by myself every day. And there were lots of hills with gravel. And I can remember I would go up to these hills and stand at the top of the hill and force myself to fall down on my knees and slide all the way down and skin my knees up. And if I didn't skin them enough the first time, I'd climb back up And I'd go back down again until I just would finally finish with my legs really being bloody and all, scratched up. And then I'd go back to the counselors and tell them I had fallen. And it was a joke with them. Oh, klutzy Nita, she's always falling down the hill. But I see now I wanted people to see how much I was hurting. And I thought maybe if they saw the physical hurt, that somebody would recognize how much I was hurting inside. But they didn't.
Trying to speak out, to break silence, is one of the child's strategies for survival. Self-induced physical pain, even bodily self-mutilation, can be signs of sexual abuse. Gradually, we learn to interpret victims' cries for help, even when the cause of their pain is not clearly stated. The silence of children comes out of centuries of denial by the adult world. In 1896, Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, found that a startling number of his women patients had been sexually molested as children. This revelation brought a shocked reaction from Freud's colleagues, reflecting a society not yet ready to face the prevalence of childhood sexual abuse. Later, Freud theorized that his women patients must be fantasizing rather than remembering real events. This theory heavily influenced modern psychology, reinforcing the myth that actual incidents of childhood sexual abuse are rare.
I didn't start remembering the sexual abuse that happened to me until 2.5 years ago. And I was puzzled why I didn't remember it around that same period of time. I'd been writing in my journal, and for some reason, over and over again, I was writing flower, 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 and drawing pictures of flowers. And all of a sudden, I was looking through some pictures. I ran into a picture of me when I was like 7 years old, and I was in my mother's bedroom, and there were flowers all over the wall, flowered wallpaper. And I realized that as a kid, when I was being abused, I must have been lying there saying that to myself, flower, flower, flower. I was able to go into a trance. It was as if I left my body, so I wasn't even aware of what was being done to my body. And I think that's also why I was easily able to forget it right after it happened and repress it. It was too much to deal with.
Okay? Now tell me something else. Tell me what you think Vivian could do to be safe around Uncle Harry so that Uncle Harry won't bother her again. Who can she tell?
Aunt Mary.
Aunt Mary. Very good. She could tell Aunt Mary. What could she say to Uncle Harry to make him leave her alone? What could Vivian say? Natasha? She could say no. That's right.
I'm going to tell.
I'm going to tell. She could tell him that she's going to tell. Then tell me something. Do adults always believe children when they tell them things?
No.
That's right. Sometimes adults do not believe children. So if you go to somebody and you say, I need help, I'm in trouble, this is happening to me, they don't believe you. You don't stop there. You keep telling someone, right? You go to a friend. You go to a friend's mother. You go to your teacher at school, the principal at school. You go to the church. Wherever you have people that you think will help you, you keep telling. Don't stop telling. Okay? All right.
The incest ended when my daughter wrote a note for me and left the house. And in it, she told me that her father had been molesting her for a long time. And when I read the note, I was devastated. And then I became absolutely angry. I was so angry that if my husband had walked in the house at that particular time, I probably would have killed him. And I really did believe my children. At least that's one good thing that I have to remember, is that I never for a minute thought that they were lying to me. I spent the whole night trying to find all the reasons why, where, when. I asked myself every question that I could. How could it happen to us? When he came home that night, I confronted him with it. And he didn't deny it, but he didn't admit it either. Well, I did feel like leaving, but it meant that I'd have to leave the only home that we had with 4 kids, and I didn't have a job, no way of supporting them, and no real guarantee that my husband would support them. I felt so powerless. I was afraid of the whole process. I didn't want my children to have to go to court and say that their father had done these things to them. I didn't go to the police for that reason.
After I started molesting my daughter, I would walk through life with a shadow on me. I was in constant fear of discovery, that I was a dirty man, no good. I stopped because my daughter told a friend, and the friend told the school authorities, and they called the police. And they came and arrested me. I was sentenced to 3 years of probation and required to be in constant therapy. I never denied molesting my daughter. I was glad to be caught. I was glad to be stopped. I felt dirty.
My husband went into therapy and he started coming out of his shell, but I never felt that he really wanted to understand what he had done. And it wasn't until 10 years later that I found out from a relative that my husband was molested as a child by his father. I was amazed that he'd never said anything about this during the 26 years of our marriage.
I'm not completely sure how it is that some boys who are molested become offenders, but I think it has something to do with their need to deny what happened to them, because it's very uncomfortable for any male in our culture to be a victim of a sexual assault. I mean, I've heard boys tell me that doesn't happen to boys, it happens to girls. And they refer to themselves as wimps and pussy feet and that kind of thing. It's a disgrace. So there's a need to deny their feelings, and there's also a need to master it. Boys who get beaten up, for example, want to get stronger and tougher and go back and beat up the person who beat them up or beat somebody else up. And that's the way they become more masculine and overcome what happened to them. That's to them an appropriate way to deal with it. And I think they also want to identify with the offender because the offender did overpower them and is strong. And boys are encouraged to identify with the strong and the tough and become stronger and tougher.
When I was 10 years old, I was sexually molested by my stepfather. My stepfather molested me for a period of about 2 years. He came in my room one night and crawled in my bed with me and started fondling my genitals. And eventually it got to the point where he was committing sodomy on me. If I couldn't talk about being molested, it would have ruined my macho image. It would have ruined my being a man. I'm still a man, even when I'm a small boy, and I can't talk about stuff like that. I can't say I was raped. Little girls get raped, but boys don't get raped. I went through 2 marriages without ever telling my wives that I had been a victim. I didn't tell anybody until I was arrested.
Until recently, men have resisted breaking silence. Yet 1 out of 11 acknowledged being sexually molested during childhood in Dr. David Finkelhorst's survey of 266 college men. Many experts believe that boys may be molested as frequently as girls.
I've heard so many victims say, being a victim myself, how could I do it? And that is one I've never been able to really have a good answer for. I know I was hurt as a child, but that in no way excuses me for doing what I did.
After the incest was reported to me, the girls wouldn't have much to do with me because their father was still in the house. But I always felt that marriage was forever. About 7 years went by before we began to talk about the incest. By that time, all 3 of the girls were married. When my youngest daughter got pregnant, my oldest daughter suddenly began to be traumatized by the fact that there might be another molest. It had also come out that the girls were molested by their grandfather. And it really just made her absolutely, I want to say, crazy with the idea that Dad's going to molest these grandkids. My oldest daughter called and said that all three of the girls were coming over to have it out with Dad. And they came, and it got very ugly, and all the blame, the hurt, the crying, the yelling, the screaming that went on it was good, because for the first time I really felt like I was part of my daughter's understanding of what a family should be. And my husband's vindictive replies just totally tore us all apart. And then he got silent. And we slowly left this room and went into the kitchen. And he sat here and turned the TV on and never said another word.
He wants to forget 10 years of our lives. But I really think it would have helped our family if my dad would have to face the judicial system. I see Dad paying because he's become an emotional zombie. He's just totally withdrawn from friends and everyone. And I see him pay in that respect, but it still is not, it's like it's not enough. He needs to be brought before his peers and be judged in that respect. That's how I feel.
Grief, betrayal, outrage. The sexually abused teenager strives to maintain her facade, but it cannot withstand the pressures of adulthood. Research suggests that child sexual abuse may be the silent heart of some of society's most unyielding social problems. Most children who have been molested pay some emotional penalty in adult life.
I found that the molest really did affect me sexually, because it was hard not to remember what my father had done when I was being intimate with somebody special. I gained a lot of weight. At one point, I weighed 100 pounds more than I weigh now. And I hid behind it. I built a wall around myself.
After the abuse stopped when I was 5 or 6, I didn't think about it. And I didn't even remember that it had happened for many, many years. When I was a teenager, I seemed very normal. I was very active and energetic, cheerleader, good student, model kid, actually. But inside, I've had an inner turmoil that no one knew about that was very painful, because it was then that things started coming back up. The memories or the knowledge that happened. When I went to college, it started getting worse. All of a sudden, all of these things that I had buried, all the hurt and the pain and the shame and the guilt started surfacing, but I didn't have a handle on it at all. And I started to silently go crazy inside. I woke up one morning, I had a roommate, and Pam found me on the bed, just shivering and crying. I just broke down. I couldn't talk. I had to write her a note. I just couldn't talk. I was just a mess. I was wrecked, just totally lost.
In my family, therapy was something that only crazy people did. My dad, in particular, put down anybody that went to a therapist. It took going into a major crisis in my life before I got into therapy. 5.5 years ago, I was having health problems. I had an ulcer, and I started experiencing depression like I had never experienced before. I finally reached a place where I really became suicidal. I called this new doctor and just said, "Help me." And so I started seeing him for therapy 3 times a week. And I still was thinking and fantasizing about killing myself. And every day I would walk to this bridge, and I would stand over the bridge and look into the water, and I really wanted to jump and would fantasize more and more. And then finally, about a week after I had started seeing this therapist, I remember going to the bridge, and I stood there and I looked out over the water, and I just thought, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I want to live. At that time, I was not remembering the incest. I just knew there was something there that had to be dealt with. And I said to myself, I don't know what it is, what I have to do. I don't care. I'm going to do anything I have to do to live, and I'm going to live.
Courage, breaking the power of the past, new life.
I told my parents 2 Christmases ago, not including this one, about my being sexually abused as a child. And the family members that I received the most support from responded from the heart, and I needed that. I think the most important thing was being able to have someone to talk to that wasn't afraid to listen and wasn't afraid to talk to me.
As the past comes into clearer focus, guilt and self-hate give way to anger.
It first started coming up for me that I needed to confront my offender when I realized I was afraid to go to Los Angeles because he lived down there. And I started saying to myself, I am the victim and I'm afraid to go down there. That's wrong. At Christmas time, I arranged, along with my cousin and my loved one in LA, to confront him. We managed to get him to an apartment, and we were all waiting there when I first heard his voice at the door. I just couldn't believe that I was standing there in front of him. And once I started going, I just started coming out. I called him every name in the book. And when I first started telling him, it was about how I felt. I never mentioned exactly what was done. He came up with, how could you say I molested you? He said, I never said you molested me. You just said it. And oddly enough, he started remembering exactly what he had done. And it was, I guess, what I wanted, and that was really important for me, to hear him acknowledge what he'd done.
I first confronted my mother about the memories that I was having about 2 years ago. I flew back to Oklahoma, and I remember the night that I got back, we started to talk about it. And I started telling her, I told her one of the incidents that had happened, which was extremely painful, and it happened when I was about 4 years old. And she was just totally shocked by hearing it. She said she was not aware that any of this was going on. But she also didn't deny it, which I appreciated. We talked about it for a long time that night, and she kept asking more questions. And so as we talked about it, we just sort of fell into each other's arms, and we laid on her bed and just held each other and just cried. With both of us just cried. That's a real beautiful, special memory to me, that she was there then. You know, I felt really bad and feel bad that she wasn't there when I was younger. But when I confronted her and talked with her, she was there, and she believed me. And that was really important to me.
I think it's just terribly important that we strengthen bonds between parent and child, strengthen the trust there, and really emphasize that. This is the best antidote I know to child abuse. I was particularly interested when I was researching my own ancestors and the tribe that they came from, the San Luiseños, that the mother-daughter bond was exceedingly important in that tribe. And two of the rituals that attached to puberty for a young girl were, one was that her mother would design a special design and paint it with very strong dyes on a rock. And that design was designated for that individual girl, and it was unique. The other thing a mother would do is she would create a song that would be specifically for her daughter. And this celebrated their closeness. And I think that when we're looking at child abuse, especially these days, we're looking at the disruption of bonds that so much distracts us from the importance of gaining that kind of closeness with our children. And this is an enormous help in counteracting child abuse.
I apologize to my daughter. I have told her that I was wrong. I have told her that I was sorry. And I've told her that I was the one who was responsible. It's my hope that getting things out in the open can stop the incest in her generation. She's gotten help, and she's got her eyes wide open now. And she knows what's happening, and she knows that she doesn't have to be a victim anymore. And she doesn't have to let her children be victims.
I'm constantly working on learning how to reach out to people and let people in. When I go down really deep inside myself, it becomes very scary. But I have to know what happened to me. By knowing the things that have shaped my life, I can challenge those beliefs I formed about myself, that I don't deserve love, that I'm a bad person. I can challenge those. For the last 15 years, I've been teaching multi-handicapped deaf kids. They're hurting kids, and that hurting child in me, I think, can reach out to them and vice versa. So if it works for the kids, it works for me, and it's just a really important part of my life.
I'm committed to somehow use my experience and turn it around and give to others. I want so much for other children to learn how to protect themselves and to learn that if it does happen, it's not their fault. All the things that I didn't have, all the tools that I didn't have to protect myself.
Let's see if we can find Safety Friends private parts. Who wants to come up and help us?
One of the most important ways for me is working with the Children's Self-Help Project, which is a prevention program for children.
Can you stand up and say no? Okay, ready? We'll stand up and say no. Oh, very good. Stand up and tell me no. Let's see, Megan. Megan, can you stand up and say no? No. Oh, goodness.
As important as prevention is, there's so much more that's needed, because once a child breaks silence, they go into the judicial system and they go to doctors and they go to therapists, and all of these people need to know how to handle this kind of a situation. And I believe it's so important that men get involved with this issue. We've all got to work on ending the cycle of sexual abuse.
The boys I work with who've been molested usually come in for treatment terrified and ashamed of what's happened, and afraid that someone else will know about it, afraid that their friends will find out. And I see that after a period of time in treatment, most of the same boys who came in so frightened are really eager, and they want to tell other kids about their experience because they know that it would help them. They want to share it, and they're proud of the fact that they've done something positive with it, that they've been able to overcome it, that it hasn't destroyed them. And they're concerned about the possibility that other boys may not get help, and that they may be in a position to offer a kind of help that wasn't available just a couple of years ago.
At the time that the incest occurred in the family, I guess more or less I didn't care about how anybody else felt. I knew I was hurting, so I'd do things to hurt other people back. That was my way of getting back for all the hurt that I felt had been dished out upon me. My dad was always buying special gifts for my sisters, and they were getting fancy dresses and other things, and I was just like I was not there half the time. And my brother and I did not get along, so I really had nobody to communicate with. And it wasn't until years and years later that I ever found out that there was incest in our family. So I've just always felt left out, totally unloved. And my sisters don't see it that way.
How'd you feel about Robin not being molested?
Mad. And I thought, why did he pick Judy and I over, not all three of us?
What would happen if right now you didn't quite listen to the words, but right at this moment you just look at Robin, just look into her eyes and see her sitting there, and maybe even without saying a lot, just see how that would feel.
I think that it's important to say that we all hurt each other. And we hurt each other for self-preservation, that we could survive. And, I had to finally look at Robin and say, even though that there was hostile moments on your part, that's what you did for attention. That's how you survived. And I had to realize that a lot of strings were pulled outside of us. Adults were pulling strings. And instead of lashing out at the adults that pulled the strings, we lashed out at each other.
Six months after this family meeting, Laverne's husband was discovered molesting two of his grandsons. This time, the crime was reported by his daughter. He was arrested and pleaded guilty. Secrets end, and this family begins to create a new life. The silence is broken.